as you can see, the title of my keynote is relatively long. That is because I put all 4 major themes I'll discuss today into that title. It's about rethinking IGA, so rethinking the way we do this core element of identity and access management. And I'll look at deployment models, I'll look at role models, I'll look at recertification and customization, because I have the strong belief that, and that's also what we get as a feedback from the market, there's a need for identity management modernization. We need to really shift to a new level and look at things which don't work as good as we like them to do. And I think there's a huge potential to also utilize some parts of what you have to modernize and to really get way better in how we do identity governance, identity administration. So how do we deal with these core elements, as I've said, like user lifecycle management, identity provisioning, including all the connectors to systems, and access governance. And this is what I'll touch on in the next few minutes. And as I've said, I have 4 topics, and the first of these topics, that is deployment. So over the past 2 or 3 years, we have seen a lot of conversations about, should I continue running my IGA on premises, or should I shift to a cloud-first approach? Or is there even more? Because when I look at many of the discussions, specifically in the broader IAM perspective, then it is that some parts of IAM tend to be commonly shifted towards an as-a-service model, while others are seen more as something that can run on premises. And it may be that a lot of customers, and that's our experience as well, are better served with something which allows them to decide somewhat flexibly about a deployment model, maybe even having instances in different models. And so when we talk about flexible deployments, it's about cloud first, remain on premises, what else to do? And so at the right side, you see this identity fabrics picture. I've talked about it in a couple of talks over the last 12 to 15 months, and there's a ton of material available at our KC Plus, where you can read through what we see behind this concept of identity fabrics. At the end, it's a paradigm for sort of a unified perspective on all identity management, including the IGA pieces. And I don't want to go into detail on that, but I just want to highlight within that identity fabric one area, one section, which is this more sort of right-hand section, which is the technical architecture. And I believe that we need to do 2 things. And the one thing is we need to ensure that we have a certain level of flexibility in deployment. We might opt for something which is purely SaaS-based. There are some options, and there might be reasons to do so. But otherwise, we should have the flexibility to shift between a sort of traditional on-premise, maybe with a managed service provider model, to something which is really a SaaS model, and which may also operate in different clouds. So to do that one thing, we need to do a second thing. We need to have an identity management, an IGA, which with an architecture that is built for that flexibility. And so modern architectures, from my perspective, are really the foundation for getting that flexibility. And I'll touch this architecture piece by the end of my talk again. But it's really having these architectures that give us the flexibility. What do I mean by that? I mean, we need to have solutions that are constructed in microservices. What we usually see from the outer side is that we see APIs, that we see a consistent API layer, a modern API layer, so REST-based commonly. And we can use these APIs later on for customization. What you also should see from the outside is that there are several containers, and that the deployment of these solutions is based on container-based deployments. And with that ability, we then can use a lot of different deployment models. There might be variants in it, and there might be reasons for going for pure SaaS, and there are some really good pure SaaS solutions. But for many use cases, specifically around IGA, what I see is that many organizations feel that they are not 100% ready for sort of going all into a pure SaaS model. Having the right architecture in place, and this is a piece of the modernization to look at, helps you in having the flexibility you need. So with these architectures, you prepare for the flexible deployment. This is a very logical thing. And if you look at the picture in the upper part, then there's the architecture, and this is what then provides the option for the flexible deployment of our overall IGA solution. So that was part one. Part two, roles. If you're honest, there are way more role projects stalling or really failing than succeeding. And I know so many customers I've talked with, and they said, "Oh, we already did three tries with role projects. We don't really want to do another one." So if something is really complex and cumbersome, the question is, are there better ways to do it? And I believe there's a time for change. And I thought a lot about roles, and I'm talking about roles for I don't know how long. The problem with roles is what I would call an artifact problem. What is the problem? The roles are artifacts, as in artificial. They are something which aren't sort of totally simple to see and logical. We need to construct them artificially. And why shouldn't we start with something real? And that real thing, that is policies. Everyone can easily describe a policy. But I've never seen a role project which said, "Oh, let's start with the policies. Let's talk about subjects that can perform actions on certain objects under certain constraints." That's the structure of all of these policies, regardless of at which level they reside. So Martin can print on printer 123 from his desk, but only from his desk, only when he's in the office. That is a policy. Everyone in the business, everyone in IT can easily describe policies. If we then cluster the subjects that have similar entitlements, and that is something we even could do with some support of technology. That's not really rocket science, that's just clustering. Then we can figure out who are the users that are relatively similar. It's a little bit like role mining, but we don't start with the roles, we start with newly described policies. So we don't start by sort of conserving the legacy and the mistakes we've made, but we start with newly, freshly described policies. We cluster it, and then we have the entitlements and permissions because they are already described in the policies. Martin needs access to the printer under certain constraints. Okay, that's a very simplified example, but someone can do certain things in SAP under certain constraints, etc. All these things are in the policies. Everyone can describe them, and everything is in there. So the role management challenge from my perspective is, at the end, we are starting at the wrong place. We must not start with creating complex artificial roles. We must start with something everyone can easily describe, and that are policies. And the good thing is, in these policies, we have the roles. We have the entitlements and permissions. But we also can derive lower level policies or policies at other levels, like we can derive the access management policies. We theoretically could even derive the firewall policies. And if the vendors invest that, we may even be able to derive a lot of that automatically. But even if you have a standard role project as of today, if you say we need this, at the end, is that a role project? It's a project of defining entitlements correctly, defining who needs access to what. Then the question is, who needs access to what? Who, the subject, access the action to what? The object. That is nothing else than a policy. The main question of identity management is who has access to what, is not which roles do we need. But from the policies, we can do everything else. And if you do a project that way, and maybe sooner or later supported by clever new technology, your role projects have a far higher chance to succeed than they have today. Tightly related to that role problem, there's the review problem. And so I tend to start when talking about this topic with a very simple question. Do you know a single organization that really loves doing access reviews, that says, "Oh, this is one of the real great things in our daily work or in our regular work. I'm really looking forward to my next access reviews by the end of the quarter." I don't know a single one worldwide, but I know a lot. So something's going wrong. Something is not good here. How can we do it better? And again, it's about policies. It is about something we get from the other policy part I've talked about. It's about policies automation. What we need to do is we need to automate to have lesser reviews. And when we look at how access is granted, then we have basically two ways. So the one way is we have manual requests, and that manual request, Martin says, I need access to that. That should be an exception. That must not be the norm. It should be automated based on policies. That should be our standard based on the organizational data, like every employee has access to certain areas of Teams, SharePoint, whatever. Every departmental manager has certain entitlements. People at that location, people in this project, etc. All these things we can derive a lot from attributes. There are a lot of attributes we usually have, and if we are good in our joiner processes, working with HR, etc., and that's an area we usually have some room for improvement, then we can get even more, and we can define what is granted automatically. And if you are a little bit pragmatic here, then this works even better, because that means if you're pragmatic, we can go and say, okay, we maybe don't care about, but everyone is allowed to do that, but Martin has a little bit different entitlements. If they are just a little bit different, and that little bit is not the high risk part, then be pragmatic and say, okay, everyone has the same. There are exceptions from that, but we can do a lot automated. And if we automate it, that means we once approve the policy, we ensure that the execution of the policy, so the translation of the policy in concrete entitlements is correct, and that we can track the entitlements based on manual or automated. That tracking is super important because that helps us in reviewing. If we know what has been granted automatically, then we, on the one hand, need still to review the single entitlements for manual requests, yes. But for the policies, we need just to review, are these policies correct? We need a process for approving the policies before they become active. We need a process for retiring policies. So we need all these, so to speak, standard processes we have around access as well around policies. But the clear question is, do we need to do manual reviews when the policies are well managed, well approved, and correctly working? I had conversations with auditors, and so far every auditor said, yes, this is fully okay from his perspective, but I don't guarantee, disclaimer here, big one, I don't guarantee that every auditor thinks the same way. But basically it is a process where you get a structuring, where you simplify, where you even reduce, and that's, I think, a very important argument. The quality of what you do will be way higher if you do it right with policies than with single entitlements and single reviews, because you then have far less to concentrate on to do it right. And when we look at this entire thing, we want to reduce, ideally, or we struggle with access requests, the number of that, so it's, and people struggle with finding where to request. We struggle with the access approvals, so for managers it is always some extra work, and we struggle most with access review. And I think you should really ask your question, where do you want to be on that equation? Do you want to be here on the left-hand side in red? Or do you want to be on the right-hand side in green with a low number of access requests, a lower number of approvals, and lower number of access reviews? There are a lot of things you can do around simplifying access reviews beyond what I've talked about. Think about time-restricted entitlements and other stuff. But policies and automation definitely help you in making this part of your job, and specifically this part of the user's job, way simpler. So, number 4, last but not least, customization. Probably the one or other of you listening to this talk already had issues where there was the next big release of his IGA tool of choice, and then a lot of the customizations didn't work as expected anymore. Scared about it? There are solutions. And the solution at the end of the day is customize outside. That requires a modern architecture. We are back to this identity fabric picture I have here, where you see to the lower right, the technical architecture I had on a previous slide. So customize and customize outside, because what you have is there are APIs exposed. And for customizing as encoding, so it's about these APIs, which we expose as an API layer, and which you then can use to create microservices for customization, which build on these APIs, which even may expose their own APIs. So if we want to move to a sort of a higher level standard capability for whatever the registration or old school password reset, we could create something which is then more sort of a widget, or however we like to call this, microservice we customize. So we can extend, we can use these APIs from our system as well as the own created APIs to extend. And we can use this to orchestrate to other applications like our IT service management, should be ITSM, not ITMS here. And if the APIs are stable by the vendor or by a wrapping layer we've put on top of that, the segregated code, our customization lives in well-defined microservices. So even if I change the platform below, the microservice remains stable. And we see this happening in a couple of IGA solutions, which are coming more from companies that derive from a system integrator area, which in fact put such layers on top of other IGA tools. And so we can do a lot here. We can do a lot around customization. And that is something which definitely helps us in doing our identity management better than before. So there's a solution. And what really is important is you should starting rethinking your IGA. Don't take it as it is. There are a lot of good things in what you have today, but there are also a lot of things we commonly struggle with. Think beyond that. Think towards identity fabrics, and we had a couple of events on that, and you have a ton of videos and text you can get from us. But think beyond that. You need IGA, but do it right, modernize it, think beyond, and also be skeptical regarding sort of the established approaches you have. That's it from my end. Thank you.